the first session of day 3 of this year's symposium. Good morning, dear colleagues. Welcome on day 3 of the EOSC Symposium 2024. It's the last day of this year's event, and I just want to guide you through today's agenda. We will have an opening panel with an opening keynote on fair data for AI and AI for fair data. Then we have a coffee break of like half an hour before we enter into 3 parallel sessions. We have then another extensive networking lunch, and in the afternoon after the lunch we will reconvene here for the last plenary EOSC impact and opportunities on the infrastructure landscape. And then at 3:30 we will enter the closing session of this year's symposium. Those of you who are interested in how the EOSC is connecting to the NFDI, you are all invited to stay here for a joint event of the NFDI and the EOSC. The first session is the panel on fair data for AI and AI for fair data. The relationship between fair data and artificial intelligence is crucial for advancing research data-driven science. And AI heavily relies on well-structured, well-organized data for training purposes, for learning, for making decisions. And FAIR is exactly the principle which makes data and metadata well organized. So this session will explore how do the two concepts can benefit from each other. We have 3 guiding questions for this panel, and the first one is, to what extent can fair metadata be useful for AI? The next one is, can AI support researchers and data practitioners to automatically produce fair data or fair metadata? And finally, the last question is, can fair data improve the understanding of provenance in AI models? These are the overarching questions. We will have more questions in the panel. The session is structured as follows. We will kick off with a keynote, and then we enter into the discussion with the panelists and, of course, the audience here in the room and those who participate online. Allow me to introduce our keynote speaker, Julia Lane. She is professor from the New York University in the US, and she brings together all the competences needed to give a keynote on FAIR and AI, because she was a senior advisor to the federal CIO at the White House, supporting the implementation of the federal data strategy in the US. She serves on the advisory committee on data for evidence building, and at the same time, she serves on the National AI Research Resource Task Force in the US. So exactly the 2 key competences are integrated in Julia Lane, and I'm looking very much forward to your keynote, Julia. The floor is yours.
So thank you very much. It's, as I was telling Klaus, it's very nice to be back in Berlin. And I am so impressed with the number of people who are here, and then the content of the conversations that I've been hearing. So this is the topic that I was asked to address. And I spent quite a bit of time thinking about how I could do this in a substantive manner. And what I'm going to try and do is to be a little bit provocative and hope that it stimulates a conversation. I've been married for a long time, so I'm used to being told that I'm wrong. So the picture on the left-hand side, as I'm facing it, is the the report of the National AI Research Resources Task Force, on which I served, and so I will draw heavily on what's going on in the United States, because you'll hear a lot, of course, of what's going on in the US, in the European Union. And then on the other picture is what I'm going to use as a framework to motivate this link between AI and FAIR and AI. And it's a picture of a sparkly fountain and the plumbing that goes under it. It is not my picture. I've given the source right below it, but I'll unpack why I think that sparkly fountain is appropriate for thinking about here. So, you know, this is the structure. I'm going to give you the sparkly fountain framework. I'm going to talk about the US experience with the National AI Research Resources Task Force. And then I'm an economist by training. I've done a lot of evaluation work, particularly now focusing on a theory of change for AI and for data investments. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then I'm going to come to the key call, which is, I think, what we need to be thinking about for very important conferences like this is how do we incentivize and democratize what we're doing, because the forces of large-scale publishing companies and large-scale businesses is something that we need to be very aware about and thinking about what to do. And then I'm going to propose a possible agenda, and of course you could tell me that I'm wrong. So here's the organizing framework. So I was at a conference with the Royal Stat Society and the National Academy of Sciences, and this approach was proposed to thinking about data infrastructure. So, you know, when you're thinking about the value of investments in infrastructure, you know, what people focus in on is the sparkly fountain. You know, they want the shiny toy. They want to see what is AI, for example, going to be able to do for me? And it's going to be health, better climate change, but all of these are the wonderful things that can happen, and they tend to ignore the plumbing that makes the sparkly fountain work. And so what I want to argue is that what FAIR is it's building a trustworthy, secure plumbing without which the sparkly fountain is not going to show anything. And I think that analogy really works, particularly because it's so hard to get funding and support to do the plumbing work, but you've got to have it in order to have trustworthy AI. So, and what I'm going to argue as well is, I'm an economist, so I think a lot about incentives. So over the past 20, 30 years in which I've been working in the data space, there's been a lot of focus on, you know, if you eat your peas, then good things are going to happen. And what I would like to argue is that in order to get the water flowing and the pieces to work together, you have to create an incentive structure. You can't just provide people with, here is the plumbing, now use it. You have to convince them it is in their own self-interest to make use of and to implement FAIR principles, for example. So that's what I mean by democratization. You need to get a lot of people on board because it's in their own self-interest. So that's kind of the framework within which I'm going to operate. And then I'm going to start with the US experience, not because I'm an American. I'm actually, as I was telling Klaus, I'm English-born. My mother is Swedish, which is my first language. I grew up in New Zealand. I just happened to marry an American, so it happened to the best of us. But anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about the US experience, the National AI Research Resources Task Force. And this, I was put on this task force. There were 12 people. I was the only social scientist, so it was a bunch of computer scientists and me. And if you want to go and take a look at our final report, I'm going to draw some from that. which was followed, we released our, it was I think a 15, 18-month task force. We released our report in January of 23, and then in October of 23, an executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of AI was released by President Biden. I should say the NAIR task force was commissioned both by Congress, the House, the Senate, bipartisan, as well as the White House, but the executive order was from the president. Now you'll see immediately from the headings of those two how that ties into this workshop, right? So on the one hand, it's the AI. How are we going to invest research resources to advance artificial intelligence? But then on the other side, how is it going to be safe, secure, and trustworthy? That's the plumbing, right? So the shiny toy bit is the AI. How do you get there? How do you make sure that the plumbing works? So what was the rationale? And this is actually my former boss at the White House, Suzette Kent. She was the federal CIO. And the idea here was, what the Congress was worried about was the concentration of work that was being done with just a few firms in AI, very narrow base, very expensive compute, where the data are, or not in the past tense, are owned by just a few firms. Klaus talked about the importance of training and test data. So how do you broaden that base? In essence, how do you democratize it? So that was the task that the NAIR had, and there were 4 areas that we focused in on. Compute, obviously. In fact, when I was named to the task force, Jan LeCun called me, and he said, the number one thing that we need to worry about is compute. I'm like, no, Jan, the number one thing we need to worry about is data, right? So that was always a conversation that we kept having. How do you get new ideas coming in? How do you broaden the base, and how do you think about the diversity? That's been very much part of the conversation here over the past several days. So the executive order established the NAIR pilot, which was based off the recommendations of our task force. And as Klaus said, I serve on the NAIR Pilot Advisory Committee. I also serve on the Advisory Committee for Cyber Infrastructure. And you can see here that these are the areas that we're focusing in on. One is classroom. One is thinking about the next generation. It's not just thinking about the production of papers and publications. It's also investing in the capacity of people to think about and work with data and think about the biases and think about the inferences and bring in new products that can be useful to the broader society, not just to big businesses, as Isabella and I were talking about. So I've noticed that that's been a very big emphasis here with open science. I cannot overstate how important I think that is. We tend to focus on publications and patents because what you measure is what you get. We need to focus in on the production of people. And then the inputs. So I know that you're thinking a little bit about what structure you should be thinking about in the future. This is the way in which the NAIR pilot was institutionalized. You'll notice that at the steering committee here comes from a set of government agencies. The basic idea there was if it is across government, then there's likely to be funding that comes from broad needs and broad imperatives like health, climate change, transportation, education, and so on, finance. So the steering committee is designed to be representative of not just the taxpayers, but also the funding sources. That's the shiny toy. That's the sparkly fountain. And then underneath, you see, and there we go, the magic red marker. Underneath, you see the inputs. That is the fair, making sure that the data are trustworthy and useful. So, you know, I said that what I was interested in was thinking about the theory of change. What are we, when we are focusing in on investments, what do we think the theory of change is? Well, I argued that the big focus, at least what I've been pushing for, and many people on the NAV pilot have been looking at, is data. Why is data so important for AI? Because it's not just compute that is the bottleneck, but this is a quote, not from someone from computer science or data science per se, but on people who have just won the chemistry Nobel and the physics Nobel. And the focus is, there's one problem. AI needs masses of high-quality data to be useful for science, and databases containing that source of data are rare. So that's the challenge. The theory of change here is what we want to be able to do is to invest in data, and then we're going to get the sparkly fountain, okay? What does invest in data mean? So going from the 80,000 mile high view, what does it mean in practical terms? So for the NAIR task force, we spent quite a bit of time talking about this, and this is some of the top people in AI thinking about what that means. Fei-Fei Li, for example, was on the data task force, and you know, she was responsible to a large extent for getting us out of the AI winter because she developed ImageNet. ImageNet was a data source that transformed the way in which we thought about the value of AI. So here's our initial findings. So this is before the Nobel, but rigorous AI R&D is often not possible without high quality, trusted, dense and transparent data resources. That's fair. But there are substantial data quality challenges. Data curation is a substantial challenge. I mean, this is what you guys are doing, right? And there are substantial costs for combining and linking heterogeneous data. And there are opportunities to learn and build on ongoing activities. So this is really, we could not have set these findings up any more carefully than from you. So what is the theory of change here? What we were asked to do by Congress is to design an AI research resource infrastructure that led to the 4 impacts on the far right: scientific progress, innovation, large and more diverse AI R&D community, and trustworthy AI. Well, with any theory of change, what you want to do is say, what are we going to do and how are we going to get there? So I would think that would be part of the agenda for you guys to be thinking about. It's all very well to say, I'm going to do stuff. Well, how are we going to know that the stuff that we're going to do is going to work? That's what economists think about. I'm sorry to be boring, but you know, so here we have Jan LeCun calling me and saying compute, and I'm saying no, data. Well, that's an empirical question, right? So what kind of activities are we going to invest in? So integrate, curate, facilitate, training, and so on. And then what we're going to do is have outputs, high quality data with appropriate protections. Fair. But really, that piece is the process piece. If you're going to get to the impact, you want to have the outcomes. At the core of the outcomes is adoption. How many people are going to take what you've done and use it? Because if it's not used, we're not going to know we're not going to get to the impact. So that's been a core focus of the NAIR, and it's going to be what I'm talking about a bit now. So the first three are the processes, that's the plumbing, and you need to get the plumbing to get to the shiny toys, but you need to think about, are we going to get to the shiny toys? So, what did we recommend? The challenge is that there is so much data, and people talk about the data, but as you know much better than do I, you start off with a big mass of unstructured and some unstructured, some structured. There's a pipeline that you need to get to what we're calling AI or analytically ready data. So how are you going to do that? You can't possibly, and this is what we recommended, the NAIR itself, the organizational infrastructure itself can't do it. You have to incentivize people to do the work for you. You have to have a community bottom-up driven approach. That's what we mean by democratization. So how do you create the incentives? And when I talk about this, how many people in here have children? God help us all, right? So when I have 3, 1, 2, and oh no, but anyway, that's another story. My son, when he was 2 years old, we started to get him to clean his room, and 3 and 4 and 5 and to 18, but never do, no, anyway. So you'd say, Ian, go clean your room. Ian, go clean your room. Ian, go clean your room. Did he go, and if he did it, he did a really bad job. But then some brilliant person said, every time he cleans his room, give him a little gold sticker. And when he gets 7 gold stickers on the fridge, he gets to go and buy whatever he wants with it, candy or whatever. Those gold stickers meant that he cleaned his room. Now think of us researchers as being 2-year-olds. God damn it, curate your data, document it, use this metadata. Do we do it? Do we cite the data? Even though we give you beautiful DOIs? No. If we want people to really do what we want, we have to figure out how to incentivize them. So, again, think about what's the invisible hand that works? The invisible hand for researchers is credit. You've got to give people credit for what they're doing. When I was an assistant professor, Dan Hammermesh told me there were 2 units of academic currency: publications and grants. Now let's think about creating a 3rd unit of academic currency, which is how many people are citing the data sets that I am using, and how am I recognized as an authority in the data? So I've got I've actually spent 7 or 8 years thinking about this, as Klaus knows, and we published this special issue of the Harvard Data Science Review. There were some copies that I left out there, just in case people are worried about me wasting paper. These are copies that had already been printed, so there's no additional damage to the environment. So how do we create an invisible hand? How do you curate things? Now, the inspiration here is Amazon.com. People are effectively providing information about the quality of books, and there's a human curation and information about whether the books are interesting and for what sense and so on. Wikipedia is another example. And people provide information, metadata if you like, about books. Now imagine creating that for data sets. So that's what we started off doing, thinking about how can we democratize data. So we read publications, we found the data sets that were cited in the publications in the text, because people don't put them in references. Once you find that, you can find out who is working on a particular topic and what they've been writing on, so that you find out for particular data sets what is the community around it, which is very useful for new people, people in marginalized communities. Or alternatively, for a particular topic, who are the experts? Where are they located? And so on. So you automatically generate, to some extent, an Amazon.com for data. The people whose data are used the most, they get the citations in lights. You can send their university or them. You are #1 in area X, and you use AI, in essence, to create the incentives for people to curate the data. So that's the core idea that can be used. And that, to some extent, sets up a possible agenda. You want to institutionalize this notion of democratization and getting a whole bunch of people involved in doing the curation work in conjunction with you. So start thinking, as we did, with the institutionalization of the NAIR, but think about institutionalizing a data and evidence infrastructure. So that you'll notice that I'm making the pass from data to evidence, because evidence to some extent is the sparkly fountain bit. The core idea here is data is very use and context specific, so build around particular verticals, but then have the shiny toys, the workflow tools that you've developed, the dissemination tools, the human-computer interaction, the search and discovery, set the standards so that they are cross-cutting and can be used across domains. Build that community of practice, which I think is exactly what you're doing. And it's the domains that identify the use cases. I'm coming to the last slide. So internationalize that effort. It's a lot of heavy lifting. I've got the plumbing on the left. What you're doing is effectively building that community to start with. I've got an example here from Baird, which is part of the NFDI infrastructure. They took dirty, nasty, ugly data on geography to provide information about climate change and flooding possibilities. So they have taken and created, gone from the ugly data to an analysis-ready data set. And then over the far right, you can see those data can be used to provide information about floodplains, which has been a big deal, obviously, in Germany. It's also been a big deal in the United States. There is a similar group that is called the First Street Foundation, which identified floodplains in North Carolina that were not used. The FEMA data were being used, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, not these better, higher quality data to identify where the floodplain actually was so that people would have known that they were likely to get flooded. That's the bottom right. The Washington Post did a thing on it. And I assume the slides are going to be shared. And it's not just the Germans. There are many other countries. I highlighted the French, so the French don't get upset. But, you know, there's a lot of work that's being done. Wolfgang has talked about it. There's a lot of, in the middle is a lot of the infrastructures that are being built and the funding interests. And over the far right is the way in which we can internationalize. So, after thinking about this for a bit, I hope that I've convinced you that the link between AI products and FAIR is you're building the future, you're already having an impact on the shiny toy. Thinking about how to democratize and institutionalize is, if that was something that you focused in on for the next time, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia, for this great impulse keynote. I'm sure we will come back to some of the thoughts you shared with us during the panel discussion. I would now like to invite our panelists to join the panel. And the first is my dear colleague, Michael Gödecke from the University of Duisburg-Essen. He's also chairing one of the computer science NFDI consortia. Michael, maybe you want to join us here. Julia is already there, by the way. Those who don't know me yet, I'm on the very left, Klaus Tochtermann, member of the board of directors. Then Alvaro from the CSC, he's running EOSC for AI, the big, or AI for EOSC, I don't know which one. AI for EOSC project, and he will certainly refer to that one during the panel. And I think Daniel is connected remotely, right? Daniel, he's a representative from a company, because we considered it also to be important having somebody from industry here. Julia raised the reason why, because we don't want, the hyperscalers to provide all the AI technology, and there he is. Hi, Daniel. Nice meeting you here online. Before we enter into the discussion, which will cover FAIR for AI and the other way around, AI for FAIR, I would like the panelists to briefly introduce themselves again and make a 2-minute impulse statement on the topic of these panels. And Michael, we want to start with you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to share my thoughts on that. AI is a great tool, and thank you very much for your great talk and connecting the tools and with the data, and also pointing to the machine room, so to say, which is the plumbing below. And I must say, from a software engineering point of view, know your tools. And AI is a great tool in both directions. And it's very important to know the profile of your tools, the weaknesses and the strengths. And I think what you pointed out, and I believe this is really a challenge, the quality of the data is actually the great issue. And looking at Hugging Face, where all these models are and all the training data is published, what you have to believe is what the authors of those training sets write in their metadata statement, what they have done to the models. And it's impossible for you as a user to check this, because the sheer size of the data and the problem is, for the single user, not solvable. I mean, you just have to believe that. And that's actually the key issue, I guess, that we have lots of curated data where you can trust, and that everything is done in a very diligent way. So trust is one thing, and the sheer size of the problem is the other issue we have to address here and get right. So the potential is there, but there's quite a challenge connected to that. Yeah.
Thank you. Then Alvaro.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. As you said, I will give you the point of view of the AI for EOSC project. We are sitting in between the shiny toy and the plumbing, with more relationship with the plumbing, actually. I think that this relationship between FAIR data and AI must be a really symbiotic relationship. I mean, AI developers, AI practitioners should learn from the FAIR principles at what the open science community has done and adopt them if we are going to build AI products with a scientific context in mind. As you said, if you go to Hugging Face, it is almost impossible sometimes to know where the model comes from, which data has been the model being trained on, which pre-processing of the data has been done, how the data has been treated, how the model has been trained, which hyperparameter, which hardware, and so on and so forth. So I'm talking about provenance, where the model comes from. And here, data lineage, I think it's a very important topic, and FAIR data is not only is about provenance of the data, but it establishes a cornerstone for setting up where the model comes from, which FAIR data sets have the model been trained on. And then on the other hand, I said this is symbiotic, because I also think that AI, if used wisely, can help in improving the fairness of the data. So in the end, we should not only think about fair data for AI and AI for fairness, but we should think on something very symbiotic between both. I mean, we need fair data to build trustworthy, secure, and safe AI systems, and we could also exploit AI systems that have been built carefully to improve the fairness and the adoption of the FAIR principles. Well, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. And then Daniel, maybe you share with us your thoughts.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. Well, I'm representing the industry, but I think our problems or the challenges are quite similar to yours. And well, I think it is clear that the FAIR principles can be very useful in the field of AI, but also the AI can be a very efficient tool for improving the FAIR application. But well, for me, one of the most interesting points is how the application of FAIR principles can help to comply with the new AI regulations in the European Union. I mean, well, as you have said, Alvaro, FAIR principles can be applied to both data, but also for the full process of building an AI model. That is the training and also documenting the final model itself with a complete semantic metadata. So documenting all the provenance. So I think it will be interesting on if these provenance models or metadata models can include all the concepts that are identified in the AI Act, for instance, the European AI Act, regarding the number of parameters of the model and so on, if the data has some biases and so on. So these concepts are already defined in the regulation, and I think it will be very interesting to consider to apply the regulation itself in the standards or in the guidelines for documenting the training of a AI model.
Thank you very much, Daniel. During the course of the discussion, I would also invite you to use Slido, also all of you who are participating remotely, so we can take your questions also from wherever you are. I would like to start with the first focus on FAIR for AI. That means we assume that all the data is fair. How can AI benefit? We have just talked about provenance and how important it is that fair data can improve a better understanding of the provenance of AI models. You did not address biases in AI models. For example, if you ask ChatGPT to write a positive statement about Joe Biden, you will get a positive statement. If you ask ChatGPT to write a positive statement about Donald Trump, you will not get any result from ChatGPT. It just refuses to provide you with a positive statement on Donald Trump. So that is a bias, I would say. And now the question is to our colleague from the US. What's your opinion on that?
There's something called the Fifth Amendment in the United States. I do think, I'm going to ignore the political comment, but I did not have time to talk about the issues of bias. I've been doing a fair bit of work about the importance of standards, and this is something that I think this EOS can do, because the issue is there are so many pieces, as you have said, from the beginning to the end, but each piece can be decomposed into a set of standards, a set of decisions that are made, and I think we can post how those standards were met, ranging from what models were used, what the bias thresholds were, what the tests were for the implications from different types of communities and so on, Just like we have an underwriter's seal of approval for standards for lamps, we should have a set of standards for that. I'll also make an argument. This, I think, is the time for us to develop our own open source representation of the work that is being done, not the publishers' houses, but things like OpenAlex, where we can equally credit data sets, sources, contributions, and so on, where it is under our control. We did the initial work with Elsevier because that was the only curated corpus that was available. Developing standards for publications as well as what goes into the publications should be a very important focus, because as long as what we're doing is curated by for-profit publishers, we're in trouble. So I would like to highlight thinking about provenance, and the reporting of provenance as something that is credited and valued in an open science domain. That was a long answer, but you threw me what they call a curveball.
Michael.
I think it's the I in FAIR, which means the semantic interoperability. Yesterday afternoon, I think Carol had a session on FAIR principles, and the I in interoperability means you have semantical interoperability of the metadata, in particular, and that means it's a community process, as you said. Right. And standardization is a community process. It needs a lot of discussion and maybe lunches and dinners as well. Yeah, of course. And it's only 10% technical. The rest is agreement in the community. And at least from my point of view as a speaker of the NFDI Cross-ES Consortium, we go to the communities, the sub-communities in computer science, and they get some general guidelines on how to set up those standards. But then they have to go into their community and to find out what are the standards for metadata in their field, which is quite diverse in computer science, as you might know. But I hope that this is also applicable to other disciplines, and they perform in the same way.
Daniel, how is that processed in companies, like in your company, community involvement, reaching out to community to jointly define standards?
Yes, well, as I said before, it is not very different than in your case. We mostly work on the climate field, and in that field we have promoted the creation of some standards. It is quite difficult to engage the community to really put in place an open initiative and involve a large community of users. It is very, very difficult, mostly in a field where it has been far away from the initiatives like the FAIR and open standards like climate. So I think it would be very useful if this standardization initiatives comes not from a company or from an institution, but from other institutions with a more representativeness international institutions, for instance, instead of going from bottom to up, going from up to bottom.
So now, Alvaro, now we assume we have all the data according to the FAIR principles. We discussed how important it is to consider provenance issues. And my question would then be, what challenges exist, for example, in AI for EOSC, in the application of FAIR data in the development of AI models? So how you mentioned you wanted FAIR and NI to have a symbiotic relationship. That means how difficult is it to reach that final stage?
Well, one important thing that I think it is missing sometimes is the interoperability between data. I mean, in order to build an AI model, you do not need raw data. You need one step forward. You need some knowledge on top of that data. You need, I mean, unless you are doing unsupervised learning, but if you are doing supervised learning when you need some data and you need some labeled data that gives a meaning to the original raw data, the problem is that you may find two different data sets meaning the same with equivalent labeling, but done in completely different ways. And both can be fair. So I think that we need to enforce more emphasis on the I of interoperability so that we can define ontologies, data models that are common within a community so that a given data set that is developed in a given community by two different teams, at the end of the day, we can make them interoperable somehow easily, and we can, for example, ingest them, we can use them to fuel the training of a convolutional neural network or whatever you want. But at the end of the day, most of the work comes in curating data before training the models. And if we exploit this interoperability part, taking into account the AI in mind, yesterday there was a joke about that FAIR is not anymore findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, it's findable AI readiness or AI ready or something like that. And I think it is not a joke. I mean, I think that the interoperable part is about that we need to make similar models with a common data model, common ontologies, so that we can ease the way where we can join different data sets, fair data sets, to build an AI model. And the other way around, I also think that AI and generative AI can sometimes be helpful if done wisely and if done with a scientific background and if done carefully to improve that metadata and even provide crosswalks between different metadata formats. It can, for example, we can use it to infer data types, automatically curate or be an assistant for automatically curate the data, removing outliers, and so on and so forth. So I think that's what I think, that this is a symbiotic relationship. We need interoperability to build AI, and AI can also be used to improve the interoperability.
Julia. And then
So that's such a great question, such a great answer. So here's what I've found to, I'm an economist, right? So that's what, so when I built large-scale national infrastructures to get to analytically ready data sets, I've started from the end and said, you know, what products do you want to build? And then you get the results and you say, oh, that's not quite right, like the Trump-Biden question. How can we fix, what was the pipeline that got me there? What I worry about is by starting, which we logically do, start at the beginning and then go to the end, you end up boiling the ocean and you're trying to do too much. But start with where you want to go and then look at the biases that you get. So it's starting with where you want and finding where the biases are, rather than trying to figure out all the different ways in which biases could work in, because then you don't get anywhere. So I'd go backwards.
I completely support this, that it's a bilateral connection, and we have to foster this in and get communities to do this, actually. And to some extent, this points to a hen and egg problem, where to start if you are in the blank landscape, so to say. But that has to be somehow done in order to come up with a good set of metadata and data as well.
Michael, since you are also a computer scientist, are you confident that we will reach semantic interoperability between data? Because that was an issue already 15 years ago. Ontology alignment was a hot topic, like in the 2010 years. And the reason why we wanted to have ontology alignment was maybe not for AI models. So computer science has been working in that field for many, many years, and now the same challenge pops up again, but in a different context.
Yeah, you're completely right, Klaus. I would say that it's actually, the pressure is now much higher because of all the implications at the societal level as well. And there is some hope that we get the things right at the moment. As you said, the currency for researchers, like the credibility and the way of citations and getting reward for doing this kind of work is getting much higher, and there is some hope, I would say, that it's done now properly.
So we've learned that semantic interoperability is key for the application of AI or fair data in AI solutions. And now the next question is, assume we have all the semantic interoperability and our data is really fair, and also data from different domains have been aligned with one another. How can then the FAIR principles support the development of the AI models? Daniel, would you like to share with us your experience?
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Yes. Now we assume that all the data is fair. We have solved the issue with semantic interoperability. We can align fair data from this domain with fair data from that domain. So the perfect world. And now the question is, how can such a perfect world on the fair data side can support the development of AI models?
Going back to my first comment, I think that having a perfect description of all the data set used to train a model can be very useful to document the final model. I mean, and the critical aspects, like the ones that are included in the regulation, is the initial data set, the training data sets biased somehow. How this the different post-processing of the data sets are made, so we can know if the final model has some biases or not. So I think this having the FAIR principles in all the process will be very helpful to provide better documented AI models.
Do we have questions in the audience or in Slido to our panelists? There is one. Do we have a microphone? There's one right in the middle of the room. Maybe you stand up or raise your hand again. There. Maybe you shortly introduce yourself.
Barbara Magagna from GoFair Foundation. Yes, as you might have heard yesterday, I want to use LLMs for producing I-adopt models. These are metadata, precise metadata descriptions about what we observe. But I am not totally convinced that we always need LLMs. We could also use deterministic methods, because LLMs are very resource intense, and sometimes too, they really need a lot of energy resources, and we should also be a little bit concerned not to use always such huge resources to get to other results that can also be done with deterministic methods. Just a question, what do you think about it?
Alvaro and Julia.
I think, first of all, a statement, because it is related with what the question you just posed to Daniel. With LLMs, there is a bit of uncertainty of what it is behind them. We have three scenarios. You have completely closed LLMs, like GPT, 3, 4. We don't know where are they coming. We don't know the architecture. We don't know the data. Then we have open models, where you have the weights of the model that are open, like Llama 2, or like almost all the Mistral models. And then we have Llama 3, or then we have Llama 2, in which the model architecture was open, but the weights, the final model train, was not open. And in these three cases, one of the important points that I think is that we need to think is that this is extremely difficult, even if we know the architecture and even if we know the data, to replicate the whole experiment. And this is where the FAIR principles are really useful to develop AI models, basically because we need the AI community in a scientific context must learn from the FAIR principles, because we need to know every single step of the data of the model preparation in order to be able to reproduce the experiment. And this comes now to your question, because for some tasks we don't need large language models because they are really resource intensive. But if we had this recipe to build or to easily fine-tune models for a specific task, we may profit from the work that has been already done, use all the knowledge, all the natural language processing that a large language model has, for example, in order to fine-tune it to a very specific task, and then we can restrict the model, and we have, obviously, the energy consumption, the resource consumption has been already done, but then we can tailor it to a very specific purpose. But sometimes this is not so obvious how to achieve that. And we need to spend a lot of engineering effort, a lot of data science effort to actually do this final fine-tuning. And then it comes again to the FAIR principles, the air, reusability, how we can reuse a model easily, how we can fine-tune it. So I agree with you, LLMs are not the silver bullet for everything. But if we were able to replicate experiments or to easily fine-tune models for specific needs, that would be a good step forward.
So that was a great question. Thank you so much. One of the things that we pushed very hard for the NAIR task force, and I skimmed over it in that organizational proposed org structure, is an evaluation component. So you have a theory of change. Part of what you want to think about is what is the counterfactual. So what you're really saying is what is the advantage of taking one approach? What are the costs and the benefits relative to the highest valued foregone alternative, right? So if you're going to choose an approach that has very high, very intense models of compute, do you invest in that, or do you invest in high-quality data? What are the trade-offs, and what is the impact on the quality of the output? So we talk about that a fair bit in the NAIR task force. Really what you were saying is, what's the highest valued alternative, and how do we think through that? There's a well-defined theory of evaluation. There have been a couple of Nobel Prizes in economics on evaluation, and that's precisely, I think, where the open agenda should go.
I think large language models are one part of the world knowledge we have. In some cases, we know how they came into existence. In some cases, we don't know. But there is more world knowledge available. For example, if you consider the keynote yesterday from Claudia Draxel doing material science, there is a body of knowledge which has nothing to do with large language models, because it's material science. They have mathematical models of modeling material, and then they use afterwards to actually make good use of the computing resources, because these mathematical models are quite expensive to evaluate as well, in order to tweak the parameters of that process. So that's another way to apply AI to that area, to that domain. And I think in the end, to have a better picture of all these aspects, and so we all have to think about what existing mathematical models or other models, economic models, so which are there, or rule-based systems, and to combine this in a more comprehensive AI, maybe general AI. I don't know whether it's actually general, but what I was saying is LLMs are not the end of the story, and we need to incorporate all the other areas of expertise we have in the room and beyond this room to get this right in the end. And rule-based systems, if given a proper theory is there, and evidence is there that these rules are working well in that area, then we should use that and not go into statistical learning and stuff like that. So that would be my recommendation for that area.
Thank you. We have now a question on Slido from our remote community. Sarah, you are the voice.
Yeah, so the question from remote is, I really like the process model of democratizing data. but I'm concerned about sustainability. Who pays to keep it going? To keep it going.
You're asking an economist what the business model looks like? The basic idea is, I'm going to give a United States answer, but the business model in the United States is the federal agencies. And there are two reasons for that. The federal agencies spend a lot of money on data investments. They have no idea how it's being used. So the argument for the agencies is, here you can identify the return on investment on your data because you see how it's being used, and you can see how the use is tied to your mission area. How are the data being used to help climate change or health and so on, and where are the gaps? So the explicit business model there comes from the flow down from the steering committee of the federal agencies, AKA the taxpayer, and that's how it's set up. Another big part of the business model is the philanthropic foundations, who are also spending a lot of money on investing in data. In the UK, for example, the Wellcome Trust, and here in Germany, there are many foundations as well. The third piece, and this is where I was really pushing, is to build a open source publication infrastructure like OpenAlex. Right now, a lot of the returns to investing in our knowledge, our scientific knowledge infrastructure, are going to the big publishers with 40% profit. You could develop the OpenAlex, which has been going for 10 years, and has a sustainable infrastructure that is also supporting that effort. So 3 answers. The federal agencies, or the national programmatic and scientific agencies, philanthropic foundations, and then there's a very good business case to be made for producing a scientific knowledge infrastructure that returns revenue, but not at 40% profit margins. Does that answer the question?
We hope so, yeah. Are there further questions in the room? Yeah, there is one, there is another one. So we have 2 questions in the room. First here. And is the mic closer to there?
Hello, my name is Victoria Dominguez El Angel. I'm coming from mandatory member in RIA of EOS Association. And well, my question is about AI metadata model for fair AI, because I think we have to create AI models more frugal. And I think metadata could be help us to doing this in a democratical way as well, because, well, as you know, AI models or generative models are in a very few hands and private hands, in fact. And I think we have to describe correctly the metadata to AI models in order to be more open and more democratic and also more frugal. What do you think about it?
I totally agree. I mean, on the one hand, regarding having these large model, generative AI models in the hands of large companies, we, in AI for EOS, we launched last week an initiative to open an infrastructure to serve large language models within the EOSC in order to study the implications of this. I mean, the technical implications, the scalability, technical feasibility, and so on. Because we think that we must remain sovereign in terms of these large language models. Nowadays, the development is done by companies, Meta, Google, OpenAI, Mistral, Falcon AI, whichever company you may think. And they are doing progress in open sourcing the models. But the infrastructure where these models run, it's still on their hands. Whenever you upload data to ChatGPT, you don't know what is happening with your data. You don't know if that data is being used to retrain a model, if they are getting that data to improve it. You don't know which data the model has been trained on, and it may have ethical implications. It can be copyrighted data, it can be data not with a permissive license, but that does not allow you to build an AI system. It can be closed source data. We don't know. Simply, it's a black box. So we are doing steps forward, trying to democratize this and remain sovereign in Europe and in the context of the EOSC. And then regarding metadata, I totally agree that we need fine-grained metadata for the models. And I come again to the previous questions and answers that we have discussed about provenance, where the model comes from, where the model has been trained, which data, and describing actually the data with very rich metadata. There are several initiatives. We are developing our own internal metadata format in the project that is compatible, for example, with the work that has been done in the RDA FAIR for Machine Learning Working Group, for example. We are also in contact with people from Elixir that have developed the DOME model for describing where the model has been trained, the data decisions, and so on and so forth. So I think that we need a vibrant metadata, let's say, ecosystem in order to finally get the pieces that are meaningful and try to work over maybe not a standard, but a different set of standards that are at the end of the day interoperable between them, because we have crosswalks between all of them, and we can understand where the models come from. So very nice question. Thank you.
There was another question over there. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Bonnie. You can hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. I'm the director of CESTA, which is the Consortium of Social Science Data Archives, and my consortium, they're experts in data curation, notably in the field of social sciences. So I'm wondering if you have an opinion how to strike the balance between experts in describing this data and the semantic interoperability, and on the other hand, scientists who we should ideally open up their data set and start to describe. And of course, there will not be an expert in metadata description. However, of course, we should help them to do so. But in between, there should be some pipeline, some facilitator. It's as I take your example, right, from some high-level plumber to somebody who can potentially fix it at home, right? So do you have a solution or an idea how it could be set up?
So great to hear from you. CESTA's, I'm a big fan of CESTA. So, and so I've been working a little bit to understand how standards get adopted and developed, and this is very much what the conversation is. You're developing standards. How do you get the community to adopt them? And that is the key link between the process and the sparkly fountain, right? So, so you can look at how standards have been adopted in different contexts. So, for example, in the building of LEED buildings, the environmentally certified buildings. That was done a lot by having some leading lights, an organizational structure, and then a whole series of meetings. There's been a set of Harvard Business case studies, Harvard Business School case studies about how that works. The same situation has happened over and over again in the United States. How do you grow the best kinds of foods in different states? How do you learn what standards work for growing the best apples or the best beef, or, you know, so the agricultural extension community. So a lot of it has to do with workshops, training materials, and the credit infrastructure. If you give people credit, you get the incentives developed. So the certification of a standard and having a body that grants the standards that people can then post, I know to trust it. So that notion of trustworthy AI, this is what we're talking about with provenance. How do I know that every step of the way is trustworthy? The underwriter's lab seal of approval is absolutely critical. So it is a conversation, it's a back and forth, but there's quite a lot of literature on how those standards get adopted and used. And that is kind of where I was coming from on that part of the conversation. And you guys are critical in that, but focusing in on not just the development of the process, but what's it going to take to get the community to adopt them is, I think, the role of standards and infrastructure development.
We have the first question from this part of the room. Over here, so... So can you bring the mic here to this end?
Thanks. Honored to be this part of the room. So Fotis Somopoulos from CERT, from EOSC project, and I'm very happy to hear both the DOM and the RDA for FML, as I'm co-leading both of those. I have a question about software specifically. It was kind of alluded so far, and I really like the example of the fountain and the plumbing. I would argue that the plumbing is the software and the water is the data, and you need all of those to actually fit better together. But my question is very specific. We are focusing quite a lot on the data to make sure that it's trustworthy, the model that is produced from that. But is there any kind of concern or any thoughts about how to deal with the software that actually produces the model in the first place? Do we need to care about that as well?
Shall I? Yes, of course, there's much of concern. So we have to take into account that software is, again, part of the machine room. And if there are 40 parts there, then we get 40 results because the garbage in, garbage out. That's kind of saying since the last centuries. And we know that software is not perfect, that we have to encounter quality issues with software. And as we discussed the quality assurance of the data, we still have to address the software quality as well. And that's quite important, not only from the view of a software engineer that I am, but the metadata about software is really a concern for our consortium. But I guess for NFDI, it's increasing as well, the software quality problem and the issues around that. And I hope we can also introduce that into EOSC on the long run.
Wow.
Yeah, just to remark your comments and your concerns. For example, when we talk about establishing the provenance of an AI system, for us, software, not only the code, but also the software that, the libraries, is a first-class actor. And it must undergo the same, let's call it, verification process as any other asset, as the data, as the final product, the code, the software, the libraries, the infrastructure, everything must be included in, let's call it, the provenance chain with rich metadata, because otherwise you cannot, at the end of the day, reproduce, for example, an experiment.
May I add? I mean, that's the bill of materials, which is the term used in that sense. It's quite important, and we already see attacks on this software supply chain, and that's also important to address. That we have a really trustworthy and secure software basis on the long run, and we had some very bad attacks on this supply chain already.
This group here is heating up. We have two questions from this side. York, and then there is one. Sarah, do we also have? We have. Okay, so you three, York, this one, Wolfram, and then Slido. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Klaus. So it's York from NFDI. I thought, what would be the biggest question I can ask to this panel? So let's give it a try. Considering that we have all kinds of data, or will have available all kinds of data, from textual to numerical, knowledge graphs, everything, right? So how can we leverage that? How can we come up with a solution that we become the forefront of multimodal, multilingual machine learning models? Wouldn't be EOSC the right ground for that?
That is indeed challenging. I give the panel a few minutes to think about it, Jörg. And in the meantime, we receive the next question. Yes.
Hi, hello. Eric Schultes from the Go Fair Foundation in Leiden and the Leiden Academic Center for Drug Research. On Monday, I was asked to give a short presentation in an opening breakout session on society, scientific, and economic impacts of EOSC. So without coordination with the panel, it's interesting that my title of my presentation was exactly the title of today's session. So very much along the same topic. I'm happy to report that I think our conclusions are independently the same, identical. So there's a really strong signal, I think, emerging here, maybe as a priority. One of the main points I wanted to make on Monday was that the amount of resources that we've had in the Go Fair Foundation over the last 10 years to realize farification has been pretty generous. We've had a good go in Go Fair. Fair has been a thing for us. With the amount of investment now in AI, which is kind of off the charts, we see a prospect perhaps that even a fraction of that investment devoted to data verification could really help mitigate the risks for AI, be seen as a wise investment by all that money going in. So it might be something that collectively, we in EOSC and maybe broader, could try to lobby the investors out there that data verification should be on their radar as well.
Thank you, Eric. And now we have Wolfram Horstmann here.
Okay,
and then
so that was not a question. Wolfram
answers.
Horstmann, Leibniz Institute for Information Infrastructure, FIZ Karlsruhe. I was getting curious about two of the comments that you made, Julia, on the sovereignty of knowledge and literature, and then you on the data sovereignty, basically. So, and the challenge that we lose it or lost it already. So I was thinking, is there actually a challenge in losing sovereignty on AI? Is there something like AI sovereignty, and has science to protect, to lose the capacity to interpret data, interpret literature?
Yes, I'm quite worried about that. And I know you've been talking with Chris Borgman about a knowledge infrastructure, not just a data infrastructure. I think it's an existential threat. So this entire infrastructure relies on people getting credit and the incentives associated with that. Our experience is that the community will not feed that kind of information to for-profit publishers. That's a very black box type of situation. We have to build an infrastructure where it is open, and I think if I were to challenge you to the next agenda, we've heard one piece, which is what's the value of investing in AI, but what's also the value of investing in a scholarly infrastructure where people get credit for all the activities, not just a small, narrow piece. So thanks for highlighting that, Wolfram. I think it is an important aspect.
I would like to join in and also address Jörg's question to some extent. If we don't do it in EOSC, where we do it then?
That's right.
And so we have to to get, I mean, we got from when we discussed NFDI in our community, we got the criticism, what is a national thing? I mean, computer science is not national. There's no border which protect us from others. So we have to go into the international community as well. And so that I think the role of EOSC is to facilitate the having a much broader than national view on these things, and that would be the collective effort to prevent us from some of those aspects you mentioned there. I mean, I'm really also deeply worried about these developments, and so if it's not EOSC, where do we do it then? I mean, that would be my comment to Jörg's question. No?
We've heard it yesterday from Gustav Kalbe that the Commission is planning to invest in AI factories in Germany, and what we need to do is to join forces, EOSC and AI, according to what you said, Julia, no AI without data. So we have questions on Slido, Sarah.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say there are lots of compliments, Julia, about your speech. So congratulations. And then there is a question related again to your speech that you spoke about incentives and implicitly positive incentives. But do you think there is a place for punishment for non-compliance?
This is a question my son had as well. You did? I think so. I think it is a very strong disincentive to be shamed for not producing high quality work. We have that now with the retraction shaming. You have to be very careful, obviously, because you don't want to destroy people's reputations in an ad hoc basis, and we've seen how that can happen in this world now. But I do think that our in our world, our reputation is everything, and so when you produce data and you put your reputation behind your data, just as you have done with your research, that is really important. You want to be sure that it is high quality and that the provenance can get tested. So that's a great question again. These are fantastic questions. Thank you.
Pass the mic to Volker.
Can I take over? I already got
the excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
Go, girl.
Yeah, okay. My name is Francisca de Jong. I represent Plenary, which is the European Research Infrastructure for Language Resources. And I was triggered by the previous discussion about LLMs, but also by what was just said about the responsibility we have to build this trustworthy ecosystem. But I would like to point to the fact that when we talk about we all talk about another subgroup, sub-community of the EOSC Federation, and maybe even we ignore initiatives that are going on and that the EOSC Federation should be aware of, and that should be attracted to what's going on here. So we are not yet there. And one example that I would like to mention related to the LLMs is that in many countries in Europe, nowadays, big investments are being made outside of the EOSC scope in large language models based on trustworthy data sets. These investments will then be of benefit to researchers, but also, of course, to all kinds of organizations in the public and industrial sphere to make use of those reliable resources. They're not yet part of the EOSC Federation, but we should be aware of the fact that these investments are also being made and that we should try to bridge the Federation to these initiatives, because there's big investments going on in many countries for many languages.
One of the things, I totally agree with you, and one of the things that I think that the EOSC can do in this regard is to facilitate and foster a competence center on AI beyond the EOSC. Because the problem is that sometimes we are in a closed environment, the EOSC,
Yeah.
but then there is, as you said, I know initiatives in Spain, I'm Spanish, and I know initiatives in Spain to build Spanish language, large language models. Probably the same is happening all around Europe, and if we could foster from the EOS this AI community of practice with relationship with open science, with all our scientific background, but beyond the EOS, I think this could be extremely useful in order to, I don't know, to landscape what is going on and how we can integrate efforts, how we can facilitate the sharing of these models and the sharing of the knowledge of the people, the team building across borders. I think this is a really important topic.
Volker, and then last question from there.
Yeah, so Volker Beckmann of the French Ministry for Higher Education.
I think it's not on.
Not on.
It was on.
Okay, but you heard who I am. So, so my question is, so we have very similar thoughts in the US and here in Europe. We haven't been so good perhaps in aligning what we do between the US and Europe. Can you say something? What is the preferred channel to improve our collaboration on this? If we go through UNESCO, it takes very long to come up with decisions and action plans. Is there something better we can do in order to align what we do?
Ask me after November 5th. It should be. Yes, I think, you know, the US is quite a bit more fragmented, I think, than the EOSC. There's nothing similar. I am hopeful that the NAIR pilot will be turned into a full NAIR. I think that is because you're focusing on AI and FAIR, and that might be a very strong possibility. The team that is doing the pilot is fantastic, and it's got a lot of cross-agency support. So I would very much hope that that possibility would be there. There are open science efforts, but they're not particularly well structured, as you pointed out. But if things go well, there is a bill for $2.6 billion to go into the NAIR that has been authorized. It hasn't been appropriated. I believe that the funds are being tagged onto another act, and so I think we're optimistic that that will go forward. If that does, that would be a very natural connection. I think very much welcomed. But right now, people are just focusing in on the next 2 weeks.
We have one very last question from GoFair, and then we close the panel.
Sorry, again. Yeah, you talked about high-quality data, but I think sometimes we also do lots of high-quality work, and we get out errors, something that doesn't work. And I think we should put away the shame to publish our failures, because we would learn so much about these failures. And that's something like that could be pushed also by EOSC, because if we know that some LLMs didn't work, we should know it. We should really get this knowledge. And I am working with nano publications, and there are so many people that are hesitating using it, because when you publish, it's out there. People can see it. And sometimes you make an error. Well, I don't care. I really want to publish it, because then I can learn.
Thank you for this comment. Since we are in Germany and we are used to be very sharp in time, I have another 12 seconds to close the panel.
You haven't answered your question.
Still thinking about it. Ooh, you got me. Okay. Thank you very much. It was a great panel, I think. maybe FAIR and AI is more symbiotic than I thought, because we did not explicitly address AI for FAIR. That could be a session for next year's EOSC Symposium. Thank you for your input, for your questions, and thank you very much for your really great, enthusiastic keynote, Julia. And thanks a lot to all the panelists. We can now enter a coffee break lasting until 11 before we go into the parallel sessions. Thank you.